The League of Women Voters is celebrating its 100th year, and one of the core values of our organization is this: voter education and helping all voters become informed and engaged in the process of casting their ballot. Our organization is not limited by sex, and we welcome all humans to join us. Jan Wagner and I will discuss each of the 12 statewide ballot measures, and the League of Women Voters of California takes positions to support or oppose these measures. If you want to find information to vote with the League, that's not what this is. This presentation is an overview of the pros and cons of these presentations. The general election is November 3rd, but elections have become election months, and ballots have been mailed out as of yesterday in Orange County, and they'll be arriving soon. Voters can return them by mail, return them to a drop box anywhere in the county, or vote in any of the vote centers that will be open October 30th through November 3rd to vote in person. If you have any trouble with your ballot, you can contact the Registrar of Voters at ocvote.com or visit one of the vote centers. So, what are propositions? California is one of 26 states in the country that has these tools of direct democracy. An initiative can be put on the ballot that lets voters place a law on the ballot, a referendum that allows voters to veto something the legislature has passed, or an amendment to the state constitution that voters approve after the legislature proposes it. We have all three on the ballot this year. So how do we get these ballots? You've probably encountered the proposition industrial complex that exists in this state, those clipboard people who get paid to stand out in front of stores or on college campuses to get signatures. This year, they had to collect 600,000 signatures for a law or 900,000 signatures for an amendment to the Constitution, unless the ballot measure is proposed by the legislature where it goes on. It costs a few $1 million to qualify a measure for the ballot before a single dollar is spent on ads. So that's what we're looking at. How to decide. How do you make decisions? If you vote yes, you have to vote yes on all of it. If it's poorly written, if it's likely to end up in court, or if it's too complex for a simple yes or no measure, you may want to vote against it. You want to look and see if you agree with what that measure wants to accomplish. Is it consistent with your ideas about government? Does it belong in our state constitution? There are measures we'll consider today that will require a vote because they will amend the Constitution. You always want to look at the sponsors and opponents to a measure, how much they're spending, how to pay for it. The Legislative Analyst's Office reviews what the impact will be to our finances. And then the merits. Focus on the merits of the issue and the proposed solution. Be wary of distortions in commercials or images that lack substance. There's millions and millions of dollars being spent. So that's one of the things we'll go over in the pros and cons today. The League of Women Voters is sponsoring a Know Your Ballot student video contest that we encourage students and parents and teachers to look into, to try to teach students to do exactly this, how to research their ballot and understand. They'll make short videos and educate the voting public about that. So you can look at that on our website, League of Women Voters of North Orange County, and there's prize money as well. Prop 14 is a bond, and so one of the things we want to talk about is what are bonds and why are they used. It's a general obligation bond that's a long-term borrowing that the state uses to raise money for large projects. The state sells bonds to investor and agrees to repay with interest on a specified schedule. General obligation bonds are then repaid from the state general fund through tax revenues and are backed by the full faith and credit of the state. So bonds help cover the initial costs, and repayment over time means that future taxpayers who benefit will also pay for them. This is just a graph of the bonds that we've already sold from past ballot measures and the bonds that are on this with Prop 14. So the debt service ratio looks at the portion of the state's general fund that's required to pay off the debts and therefore can't be used for ongoing state programs. There are 12 propositions. It's a long ballot. We're going to split it up today between my partner, Jan Wagner, and myself to go over them. And so she's going to take the first 4, and then I'll come back for the middle 4, and then she'll finish us up. And I'll talk a little bit about how to vote. So I'll turn this over to Jan Wagner with Prop 14.
Hey, our first initiative that we'll talk about today is a bond. It is the only bond on this ballot this year. It authorizes bonds to continue stem cell research. So in 2004, we approved $3 billion for research using stem cells. It's unusual as a bond issue because it didn't fund infrastructure, it funded research. Stem cells are a special type of human cell that is used for medical research. It can grow into different types of cells, brain, heart, virtually all the cells, and it's used to find disease treatments. The original bond issue funded the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. All of that money has now been spent with the exception of just a few $1,000,000. Therefore, this bond is seeking an additional $5.5 billion to continue stem cell research. It sets aside money for specific research in brain diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It limits funds for administration, makes several administrative changes to the CIRM oversight body and its governing board. It makes it larger. It's a large board. It goes from 29 to 35 people. It requires the sale of the bonds over 11 years, which is a bit unusual. So they would sell $540 million per year. And the changes are intended to expand patient access to stem cell treatment. The legislative analyst estimates that the $5.5 billion would cost us $7.8 billion over 30 years to repay. And it does entitle the state to revenue from any new inventions or treatments, although we don't know if or what those would be. Those who are in favor say that stem cell bonds have led to new treatments and that it provides money that will help fight serious diseases. There is a long list of supporters. It is primarily funded by a Mr. Klein, who funded the first bond issue as well. He is a real estate developer who has a particular passion for this research. Those who are against say that we shouldn't be spending billions of dollars on this issue and that the federal government and private groups who were not available to pay for it initially are available to pay for it now. And this is the person, I'm sorry, the next slide, please, Jody. This is the person who is listed as in opposition. So that brings us to the first big blockbuster initiative on our ballot, and that would be Proposition 15. Proposition 15 is California Schools and Locals Community Funding Act of 2020, better known as the Split Roll Tax Initiative. It is a constitutional amendment, an initiative constitutional amendment, meaning that it was put on the ballot by the gathering of signatures, and it would amend Proposition 13. Proposition 13 requires that residential, commercial, and industrial properties are all taxed based on their purchase price. Property tax is limited under Proposition 13 to 1% of the purchase price at the time of purchase, with an annual adjustment equal to the rate of inflation or 2%, whichever is lower. The legislative analyst says that market values in California typically increase much faster than 2% per year, meaning the taxable value of commercial and industrial properties is often lower than the market value. They turn over much less frequently, largely because they're held in many different ways. There's not one owner, so you can shift a large significant number of owners and still keep an owner, and the property therefore doesn't change hands. Next slide, please, Jody. Proposition 15 specifically targets commercial and non-farm industrial property. It does not make changes to Proposition 13 for residential properties of any kind, to agricultural land, and to owners of commercial and industrial properties whose business owners have a total of $3 million or less in holdings in California. All of those properties would continue to be taxed based on their purchase price as Proposition 13 taxes them now. Mixed use properties such as you've seen that have, say, commercial on the ground floor and residential properties on 2, 3, 4, 20 floors above, would be assessed only to the extent that the use is commercial. So if it's a 4-story property, the ground floor is commercial, 25% of the property would be reassessed and 3/4 of the property would not. Zoning is not the determining factor. The use is the determining factor. So if an apartment building or a condominium complex is in a commercial zone, it is still residential property and it still would not be reassessed. Reassessments phase in beginning in the 22-23 tax year. So it would generate between $6.5 and $12 billion per year. The allocations would go 40% to schools and 60% to local governments. Those who are in favor of it say that industrial and commercial properties should not be assessed and should not be paying tax at the same rate as residential property, and that it would make our government our tax base in California much more stable. Those who are in favor are largely the Democratic Party and unions and various so-called good government organizations. It's being funded heavily by several unions. Those who are opposed say that it is an attack on Proposition 13 and that it would be a worsening of the climate for business and job creation in our state at a terrible time to do that. And those who are opposed are largely the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the Republican Party, and of course, the big funders against it are the oil companies and the large industrial landowners in the state. So that brings us to the second of our large issues that are on the ballot. And though nowhere near as much money is being spent on this one, this is Proposition 16. It allows public agencies to consider diversity, and it is a legislative constitutional amendment, meaning that it was put on the ballot by the legislature. So in 1996, California voters passed Proposition 209, which prevents public programs from using affirmative action in public education and employment. Both our state and federal constitution provide all people with equal protection under the law. Proposition 209 prevents people from using a person's race, sex, color, ethnicity, or the country they come from for admission or hiring decisions. However, a person's sex may be considered as necessary for staffing. Say if you are staffing a prison and you have to have a warden who is the same sex as the inmates. You can also consider factors of race, for example, if it's required for a federal contract that has a requirement for minority hiring for subcontractors or something of that nature. What Prop 16 would do essentially is reverse Prop 209. It would say that it is allowable to use affirmative action or to include race, sex, color, ethnicity, and the country of origin as part of their decision making. Quotas would remain unconstitutional under the Federal Equal Protection Clause, but those factors may be considered as one of several factors in those decisions. The budget effect would be essentially no effect on state or local budgets. Those in favor say that it would help women and people of color fight long-standing patterns of discrimination. And it is a long list, largely Democratic. Those who are opposed say that the state should treat everyone equally and that the way to do that is to simply not pay attention to race and color and ethnicity. And it is also a long list, largely Republican. So that brings us to Proposition 17, and it is voting rights for people who have completed their prison term. It is also a legislative constitutional amendment, meaning that it was put on the ballot by the legislature. People on parole must follow certain rules. Parole usually lasts approximately 3 years, and people on parole are currently not allowed to vote. Approximately 50,000 people in the state of California have completed their prison terms and could be eligible to register to vote under this proposal. Increased voters equal increased costs. So the budget effect of Proposition 17 would be a one-time state cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then counties' costs would increase depending on how many new voters would register to vote. It would update the state's voting system, so costs would depend, varying on how many people register to vote, but it would be less than 1% of the general fund budget. Those in favor say people on parole pay taxes and should be allowed to vote as well, and that parole is a time for people to rebuild their lives. These are the people who are in favor. Those who are against say that parole is a time for serious and violent criminals to prove that they have changed, and they shouldn't be allowed to vote. And these are the people who are against. You will see the Election Integrity Project listed later on another initiative as well. And this brings us to Proposition 18, voting rights for 17-year-olds, also put on the ballot by the legislature and also a constitutional amendment. And that is for Jody.
Yes. So this is a straightforward initiative. It's just a question right now. 17-year-olds who are U.S. citizens can pre-register to vote, but they are not allowed to vote until they turn 18. Prop 18 would change that and allow 17-year-olds to vote in the primary election or special elections if they will be 18 years old by the general election in November. So if we use this election guide calendar as a guide, if you're 18 by November 13th, you would have been allowed to vote in the March 3rd primary. If you turn 18 anywhere between March 4th and November 3rd, you would have been allowed to vote. So it's a few months. It's not every 17-year-old, but it's a few months depending on California has moved their primary election. Seems like it might stay in March. Because elections cost money, it would increase costs to the state by adding the number of voters in the primary election. Depends on how many 17-year-olds would register to vote for that to determine how much it would be. The people who are for it say that allowing 17-year-olds to vote in the primary will help to increase voter participation. If someone will be 18 years old by the general election, they should be allowed to help choose candidates on the November ballot. As you probably know, there are some local elections that only appear on the primary ballot unless there's a runoff, like the Orange County Board of Supervisors, the Orange County Board of Education that were chosen in March. Those people who didn't vote in the primary didn't get its choice in who those people were to represent them. The folks who are supporting, it was put here by the legislature. It's actually kind of a fun story. Assemblyman Kevin Mullins is the one who proposed it. His dad was in the assembly before him, Gene Mullen, and he proposed it and it didn't get on the ballot. And one of the reasons that Gene proposed it was because he was a career high school civics teacher, a government teacher, and had worked with 17-year-olds and civic engagement and education. So it's a family tradition to put this on the ballot. So the folks who are against it say that 17-year-olds are not legally adults and they're not mature enough to make important decisions and that they will be unduly influenced by high school teachers and counselors. And it's the same Election Integrity Project California that was opposed to Prop 17.
Jody, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Because this was my bad. We were going to take a break and between us and invite questions for a few minutes. And I just ran wide ahead into yours.
That's okay.
So
let's do that. Let's take questions on Props 14 through 18.
Okay.
Any questions in the chat? I know there was one emailed by someone about Prop 15 that was in the chat before.
On Proposition 15, they were hoping to get clarification on exactly what a no or a yes vote will mean, especially regarding our Proposition 13 tax benefits.
So all initiatives, your no vote means that you want things to stay the way they are on anything. Your yes vote means that you agree with the proposition in its entirety. Now, this proposition is a complicated proposition. At its core, however, if you're talking about your Proposition 13 benefits, I can't make an assumption. I guess I'll make an assumption that you're talking about your residential Proposition 13 benefits. They are completely unchanged. This initiative has nothing to do with residential property of any kind. It has nothing to do with residential property that you live in, that you own and rent, that you own as and use as income property. If it's residential property of any kind, it is completely unchanged. If you are talking about your business property, if you own less than $3 million worth of business property, it is also completely unchanged. If you own more than $3 million of business property, then it affects you. Your property would be reassessed every 3 years. The assessments would begin starting in 2022. This is commercial and non-farm industrial property. If someone wants to talk about farm property, we're talking about the part of farm property that is not, so if someone has a roadside stand that is a restaurant or that they sell, that part is commercial, that gets reassessed, the farm part does not. I'm not going to go a whole lot beyond that unless someone has a follow-up question. Does that help?
Thank you.
We have a question from YouTube. It's for Proposition 14. How long will the new bond fund the CIRM?
It is phased. They are requiring that it be used over 11 years. So it will last for 11 years. We'll pay for it over 30, however.
Okay. For clarification on Proposition 16, does the Proposition 16 require or allow affirmative action?
Proposition 16 reverses what we have in our Constitution right now is a statement that says that we cannot use affirmative action. This reverses that. So it says that it allows affirmative action in future decisions. So what you would, if you vote no, you say that we leave things the way they are now, which says that there will not be affirmative action allowed in decisions for admission to educational institutions and hiring practices. And if you vote yes, it says that you reinstate the ability to use affirmative action in those decisions.
Who is or are the Election Integrity Project?
We have no idea.
Okay, fair enough.
Ellie, there was a related one on question 14. It said the previous bond did not allow construction, but it looks like this version of 14 does. Is that correct? In other words, does this version of the proposition funding the CIRM allow construction?
I'm not saying that it didn't allow construction. It simply is unusual in that it is not a infrastructure-based project. It's
Okay.
allowing, what it is primarily focused on doing is funding research
Okay.
rather than constructing buildings or roads or bridges or dams or something of that nature.
Okay, so this one,
They need to use some for constructing a hospital wing or something of, or a laboratory or something of that nature. It doesn't preclude them from doing that, but that's not the focus of this initiative.
Okay. The last question I have here is it not true that the real payers of Proposition 15 tax increases are the people of California because the increased tax would be passed through to the customers of the corporations or by the renters who rent their business space from corporations?
Those, I'm going to give you both sides, okay? Those who are opposed to Proposition 15 say exactly that people, that rents would go up because the tax increase would get passed on. Those who are in favor of Prop 15 say that rents in commercial spaces are driven by the market, just as anything with real estate are driven by the market, and that rents would be a market-based proposition no matter what. They will go up or down based on what the market will bear for the rent in that space. And that the tax that is imposed on that property really has a minor bearing on, say, if you are a tenant in a shopping center, you probably have a triple net lease, which means you're paying for the rent, the utilities, and the insurance. Well, in that rent, one can assume is the tax base as well. But if that shopping center is not doing well and there's a lot of vacancies, there's not going to be an increase in the rental space because they need to get more tenants. So it's a market-driven force rather than a cost of passing along tax increases. So those are the two sides, and you need to make your own choice there in which you think is more likely.
Thank you, Jan. That's all the chat questions I have.
Okay, well, let's move on then.
We'll go back to our Proposition 19, which is property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for wildfire agencies and counties. It's a legislative constitutional amendment. Currently, again, we're dealing with Prop 13, which we've already gone over, limits the property tax increases Another initiative, Proposition 90, was passed in 1988 that allows seniors 55 and older and the disabled to transfer their Prop 13 property tax protection if they move within their own county or 10 reciprocal counties. It also allows a transfer between spouses, parents, and children, and to grandchildren. And it would then, Prop 19 would expand that special group exemption when moving to a new home to anywhere in the state and increase the number of times you can take that transfer from 1, which it currently is, to up to 3 times. If it's a more expensive house, there would be an adjustment. Another change is that inheritance for children and grandchildren would have to be for a principal residence. So somebody would have to live there. Right now, it's got sort of a loophole for rental properties, keeping that lower property tax. And so this would take that loophole away. So it would reassess all inherited property that wasn't a principal residence. The state tax increase as a result of that would be allocated to wildfire, fire suppression, and the counties being reimbursed for those costs. So the budget effect is that it would increase some taxes and lower others. Local governments could gain tens of millions of dollars per year in the first few years, and then a few hundred millions of dollars over time, where the lower property taxes result in lower state match school funding. And then counties would have to spend money to measure those property taxes and assess those inheritance if it wasn't a primary residence. So the people who support this say that people should not have to pay higher property taxes on a new home if they lose their home in a disaster. It does expand that special group to be those who lose their homes in a disaster. And the people who support it also say that it protects older homeowners and creates new opportunities for renters. The idea being that there would be more houses on the market as seniors are allowed to take that property tax transfer. The people who are supporting it is this group that is mainly funded by realtors as a part of that coalition. The people who are against it say that Prop 19 is a tax increase that was rejected by voters in 2018, and it says that it would hurt families who can't afford to pay taxes on an inherited family home. The folks who are against it are mainly the editorial boards of newspapers that are fairly anti-tax. Prop 20, law enforcement, changes to sentencing, release, and DNA. This is a little bit complicated because it changes a number of initiatives. So the way it is right now is that felonies are considered the most severe crimes. We have kind of felonies and misdemeanors. Parole after release from prison for a felony, and there's a court order to reduce prison overcrowding associated with Prop 47 and Prop 57 and AB 109, which are all going to be changed if Prop 20 is passed. So some of the changes over the past 10 years are that punishments were reduced for people convicted of some nonviolent crimes and has let people out of prison early. So what Prop 20 would do is undo parts of Prop 47, Prop 57, and AB 109 that were passed by lawmakers and voters over the past 10 years. It creates a new kind of term for theft and fraud that could be a misdemeanor and could be a felony, and it will leave it up to the court to decide whether or not that crime was considered a misdemeanor or a felony. It wobbles back and forth. It changes the factors for parole and hearings. It further limits crimes that qualify for early release. One of the unintended consequences of initiatives is the people that write it can sometimes leave things out. Initiatives are often not as well vetted as legislation that goes through hearings, and so this would add some more additional crimes that people feel that need to be limited for that early release. It would increase local requirements for supervision and add a provision that DNA would be collected from people who committed certain crimes that currently do not have DNA collected. So the budget in effect is that it would increase the prison population as fewer people are let out and crimes that are currently considered misdemeanors would be considered felonies. It would change post-release supervision and increase state and local costs by tens of millions of dollars because prison in California is incredibly expensive. The people who are for this say that Prop 20 prevents violent criminals from getting out of prison early, that collecting DNA from people convicted of drug possession or shoplifting will help solve more serious crimes, such as rape. The people who support it are mainly Republicans and law enforcement. The people who are against it say that California already has some of the toughest laws against serious and violent crime, and that it wastes millions of dollars on prisons that could be spent on other things. The people who are opposed to it, former Governor Jerry Brown, and some, the ACLU of Northern California and one of the unions. So that's Prop 20. Prop 21, the Rental Affordability Act, the way it is now, we have a law called the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act that severely restricts rent control, does not allow local communities to consider rent control. If this seems familiar, it is. It's a redo from Prop 10 on the 2018 ballot that was rejected. And so Prop 21 does a couple of things different. Often when a measure is defeated, the people who really want it will come back with some changes in the hopes to placate the voters. And so now the rent control, and again, Prop 21 doesn't enact rent control, it only allows local governments to pass measures about rent control. So to do that, local governments would only be allowed to pass rent control measures if the residential properties are over 15 years old, and that the landlords, the people who own the property, have to own more than 2 homes, so 3 homes or more, or properties. So it would allow rent increases in rent-controlled properties. It would allow local limits on annual rent increases, and it would exempt people who only own 1 or 2 properties. And because California law already has the right of fair financial return, the rent control would have to still allow profits to be made by the landlords because that's already included in California law. So the budget effect, there's a potential reduction in state and local revenues as rent costs would be controlled under the measure. So there would be reduced property tax from rental property, partially offset by higher property tax from sale of rental property. More disposable income for renters may increase sales tax as people would use that additional money that wasn't going to rent for purchasing things that have sales tax, and increased local government costs likely to be offset by fees to the rental owners. So that's kind of the budget effect. With all of these budget effects, there's sometimes the idea that the law itself changes behavior. So it's impossible to predict with a crystal ball exactly what people would do as a result. But that's the estimate from the Legislative Analyst's Office, who's working with the best information they have. So the people who are for Prop 21 say that rent control will help families and children, senior citizens, and veterans stay in their home, that it's fair, that it guarantees that landlords can still earn a profit, and that the high cost of living in California has led to the lack of affordable housing and increased homelessness. The people who are for it, a long list that you can see, lots of Democrats in the California Democratic Party, the Tenants Union, the president of AIDS Healthcare Foundation. What people who are against it say is that rent control laws will cause landlords to evict renters, that it will make housing less available and less affordable at a time when people are struggling to get back to work, that it'll hurt renters by discouraging private sector builders from bringing more affordable housing units to market, and some that simply say that rent control doesn't work. The opponents, again, lots of building and trades, the Council for Affordable Housing, the Chamber of Commerce, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and other taxpayer associations that you can look up on to see who those folks are.
Okay. So Prop 22 may or may not be the most important issue on the ballot, but it is easily the most expensive. I am sure that you have all seen more than your share of ads on this issue. It exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits. So, a bit of recent history. On August 10th, well, okay, let me go back even further than that. We have almost 1 million drivers in California who provide app-based rides and delivery services. Most of them are part-time. They choose when and where to work. They use their own vehicles. They cover their own expenses, and they make something less than minimum wage or around minimum wage. The legislature passed AB 5 in September that covered independent contractors and employees of all stripes. And it exempted several work classes, but it did not exempt app-based drivers. And therefore, rideshare companies were deemed to have to provide employee benefits. Rideshare companies just ignored it and continued to operate as they already had. So in August of 2020, the court ruled that Uber and Lyft were in violation of AB 5. Uber and Lyft essentially said, we're leaving California. On August 20th, the ruling was stayed based on the fact that this initiative was up for a vote. And DoorDash and Lyft, Uber, Instacart, Postmates all said, we're going to spend $110 million if necessary to defeat AB 5 and pass this initiative. Hence all of the ads that you are seeing. So what would Prop 22 do? It would define app-based drivers as independent contractors. It does not affect all the other workers that were affected by AB 5. It does enact some policies, and the policies are drivers would not receive minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, or workers' compensation. They would receive 120% of minimum wage for each hour spent driving, not waiting, but driving. They would receive a health insurance stipend. So they wouldn't receive health insurance per se, but they would get a stipend to help pay for it. And the company must buy insurance to cover medical expenses when a driver is injured while driving. Drivers are restricted from working more than 12 hours a day for a single rideshare or delivery company. They could work for more than one, however. The budget effect would be minor increases in state income taxes. So what do those in favor say? Those in favor say that rideshare and delivery drivers want to be independent contractors, and that forcing companies to hire drivers' employees would get rid of hundreds of thousands of jobs. When you've got 1 million people driving, chances are you've got some on both sides of this issue. Those supporters are listed here. The money, as I told you before, are DoorDash, Instacart, Lyft, Postmates, and Uber. Those who are against say that rideshare and delivery companies don't want to pay basic benefits, and that drivers should be treated as employees so that they get benefits. And those who are against are an equally long list. So that's Prop 22. And you'll be seeing about it all the way until Election Day. Prop 23 is, we are once again asked to involve ourselves in the dialysis clinic wars. The way it is now, federal standards require that a staff physician visit every dialysis clinic for a certain number of hours every month. That requirement is generally met by a roving doctor who is able to visit and supervise several clinics monthly. The average dialysis patient requires treatment 3 times a week for approximately 4 hours per treatment. That means that clinics stay open for extended hours and on weekends. A patient's personal doctor must visit them at least once per month during treatment at a dialysis clinic. This initiative was put on by essentially a union that is trying to unionize the dialysis clinics, and it is fought by the 2 large companies that own the bulk of the dialysis clinics in California. It would end the practice of a single doctor supervising several clinics, because they would have to have one doctor, actually more than one doctor, because of the extended hours on site at the clinics at all times. It would not affect a patient's relationship with their personal doctor. So here's what it would do. It would require dialysis clinics to have a doctor present during treatment hours. Can we go to the next slide, please, Jody? It would require clinics to report any dialysis-related infections every 3 months. That's pretty easy. It would not be a big change. And it would not allow clinics to discriminate against clients based on their insurance or how they're paying for their treatment. Currently, Medicare and Medi-Cal set rates for treatment. Private insurance pays many, many, many times more than the Medicare and Medicaid rate for treatment. So the budget effect, the cost for a physician on site would be several hundreds of thousands of dollars per clinic. The data reporting cost would be insignificant. The healthcare costs for state and local governments might increase in the low tens of millions of dollars as clinics negotiate higher reimbursement. So those in favor say that dialysis is a dangerous procedure and that doctors should be more available to the patients. And it is primarily those in favor are primarily funded by the union, who is in a long-lasting battle to unionize DaVita and Fresenius, which are the 2 large companies that operate most of the clinics in California. Those who are opposed say that it would take thousands of doctors from hospitals and emergency rooms, and that some clinics might close due to the increased costs. And those who are opposed are the money against it is primarily being put up by DaVita and Fresenius. So that brings us to Prop 24. This initiative is similar to a law recently passed in the legislature called the California Consumer Privacy Act. So, as we all know, businesses collect data about us for many, many reasons, and exist to sell the data to other companies and use it to improve services. The California Consumer Privacy Act affects businesses that earn more than $25 million annually, buy, share, or sell data from 50,000 individuals or more, or 50,000 households or devices, or who earn 50% or more of their annual revenue from selling personal data. So that's who the California Consumer Privacy Act impacts. This initiative removes the device count from the current act and raises the threshold so it affects only businesses that buy, sell, or share data from 100,000 individuals or households. It increases people's power over their personal data and limits the use of sensitive personal information. Now, sensitive personal information is precise geolocation, race, ethnicity, religion, genetic data, private communications, sexual orientation, and specified health information. It defines violating a minor's privacy rights and triples the fines that are in the current act to $7,500 per incident, and takes away the 30-day grace period and makes penalties immediate. The California Privacy Protection Agency would take over enforcement of any violations from the Department of Justice. So the budget impact would be a $10 million, it sets aside a $10 million annual budget. There would probably be trial costs in the low millions of dollars. The fines on the companies might offset the state costs. Otherwise, budget costs are unclear. Those in favor essentially say that we need to have this law passed because there's constant pressure from the data companies on the legislature to keep trimming back the existing law. And so they want the initiative on the record, because then the legislature can't be subject to trimming back the law. And the supporters include a name you may recognize. Those against it say that it fails us in that it creates loopholes, that it weakens privacy for small business owners because it brings up that number to 100,000 from 50,000, and that consumers have to be proactive. They have to fill out paperwork and send in forms as opposed to having to be reactive. In other words, if you, in Europe, for example, the companies are banned unless we say they can collect data, as opposed to we have to stop them from collecting data under both the current law and under this initiative. And it's a long list of people who are in opposition. So that brings us to Proposition 25, and this is the referendum that is on the current ballot. A referendum means that a yes vote means that the law that is currently in effect, that eliminates money bail, would go into effect. A no vote means that you want to restore the money bail system. So I'll get back to that again. The way it is now is that people charged with a crime have the right to be released before trial. And they have to either make a promise to appear, have a financial guarantee of their own personal assets, or they purchase bail insurance, a bail insurance policy. And, you know, they're not these mom and pop shops that we think they are, you know, where you see these little bail stores near courthouses. It's a multi-billion-dollar international insurance industry. So in 2018, SB 10 passed, and it replaced bail with a new system of risk assessments that essentially did away with cash bail. Right away, the bail insurance industry, filed a veto referendum. And so the new law, SB 10, was stayed from going into effect pending the referendum. And so it's pending today. So trial courts consider the seriousness of the crime, the prior criminal record, and the likelihood a person will appear when they decide whether to just allow a promise to appear, how high the financial guarantee needs to be for whether or not they should appear. So that's the current system. What Proposition 25 would do is a yes vote would allow SB 10 to go into effect. A no vote puts us back at the current money bail system. SB 10 allows people charged with a less serious crime to be released without bail. Courts would then determine if people charged with more serious crimes should be released. They will establish a pretrial assessment division to make recommendations regarding the condition for release. The State Judicial Council would decide which risk assessment tools are valid. A judge could keep a person in jail if he decides they are a danger to the public or might not return to court.
We were not planning on making
People
since we
are released from jail and but they could be required to check in with a probation officer or wear a tracking device. High-risk defendants that are told that they have to stay in jail could argue their case before a judge, and the judge could say that they could be released with conditions. So that's what SB 10 sets up. The budget effect is that getting rid of bail would cost the state and local governments in the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars to administer the new system each year. Counties would save in the high tens of millions of dollars due to lower jail costs. Those in favor say that the current bail system is unfair. Essentially, poor people stay in jail because they can't afford to pay. And also that there is a 10%, that bail insurance has a 10% non-refundable fee, so that even if your charges are dropped, you've still had to pay 10% for that bail insurance. And those who are supporters are here. Those against say that the state's new system could discriminate against certain people and that our communities will be less safe under the new system. And those who are opposed are essentially bail bond companies. These other people are listed. However, the bail bond companies are the money behind it.
I'm going to share my screen again just to go over the last few slides about how to vote and any questions about that. Things are a little bit different. There are some local measures in addition to the 12 statewide measures. If you're in Cypress, Costa Mesa, Fullerton has 2 local measures on sales tax and the fireworks ballot measure. La Habra has one on cannabis business tax and open space. Los Alamitos, Newport Beach, Orange, San Clemente, Tustin, and Westminster. Most of the information that you would want to find about more details can be found at your city websites. Vote Safe is a way to do it. You can track your ballot. Neil Kelly, our Registrar of Voters, is amazing and has been giving interviews and does videos if you want to follow the Registrar of Voters on social media. But you do need to postmark your ballot by November 3rd. You can vote by mail. Every voter will be sent one, as we did for March, the March primary. You can drop it off at one of the drop boxes all around the county. It does not have to be in your location. You can drop it off your sealed and signed ballot at any drop box. You can vote. The vote centers will be open starting October 30th from 8 to 8, and then on election day, November 3rd, open at 7 a.m. There are vote centers all over, and ocvote.com has that information. If you want to know about the candidates on the ballot and more information about that, I encourage you to go to Voters Edge, which is the League of Women Voters website that allows you to look up in one spot all of the people on your ballot, which is nice for statements and information about those candidates. Again, not telling you who to vote for, but just giving you that information that the candidates provide. There's also lots of places to get more information. Our website is the League of Women Voters of North Orange County.org. If you want more information about that student video contest, you can encourage folks to join and make videos. The voter guide from the Secretary of State that many of you have been referring to, that official voter information guide. The Easy Voter Guide gives you summaries of every one of these statewide ballot initiatives. The Easy Voter Guide from the League of Women Voters. Again, the Voters Edge for candidate information and what your ballot will be on. If you want to know more about who's supporting or opposing, there are two really great sites for campaign finance: Cal Access, which is the Secretary of State's website, sos.ca.gov, and then Campaign Lobbying will give you all of the donations that have been given for or against a ballot initiative. Ballotpedia is amazing and gives you summary one-stop shopping like Wikipedia. You got to check your sources, but it's really well done to give you who's for it, who's against it, the text of the bill, the money that has been donated, and then there are hundreds of millions of dollars being donated for this particular election. And so you do want to know that information.
Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this on. We really appreciate it. OLLI appreciates and welcomes you every ballot year or election year to do this. We really appreciate all the work you put into this. So thank you, all of you.
You're welcome.
And a big thanks to Jim and Ellie Monroe.
Yes.
And Bill and Bob.
And Bill and Bob, absolutely.